Welcome to the Romania River channel and my first impressions of Ultimate General Civil War. The second game in the Ultimate General series, the first being Gettysburg if I'm not mistaken, made and published by Game Labs, a Eastern European developer, if I'm not mistaken Ukrainian. Before anything else though, standard disclaimer applies. I received a review copy of the game from the publisher/developer for the purposes of doing this video, so keep that in mind. Now, the game itself is within the strategy genre, specifically the tactical real-time strategy genre. Though it has a pause feature, it's more or less not balanced around the whole TBS element. Yeah, it's fairly simplistic in command features, so to say. You're not commanding individual troops, you're commanding units of troops, and even the graphical representation isn't one-to-one, but that simplicity does lend itself to some rather interesting tactical depth in the battles, especially considering the major battles, while they start off pretty similar to minor battles, get incredibly intense and difficult and complex later on. And honestly speaking, if they weren't multi-stage, you'd probably run out of ammo with alarming frequency in them. But that said, let's get to presenting this early access game. In terms of options, it's bare bones as hell. You have a windowed mode option, which, to be honest, is very much appreciated for me personally, because most games I try do not have this option, at least in the incipient stages. You have to find some way to brute force it via the config file, which isn't always optimal. The VSync option is also good because, depending on driver and on GPU, you could get runaway FPS issues wherein you're in the menu and for some inane reason the driver decides you should be running the menu screen with 500 FPS even though you're on a 60Hz monitor. Not exactly ideal. The resolution is a bit weird in that it doesn't have the 1280 by 720 or 720p for layman's option, but otherwise pretty well balanced. No 4K option, but this isn't really an ambitious game in that regard, and the graphics themselves are not demanding. I mean, my Fury Nitro and Xeon E3 V312 V1231 V3 did not have any issues in large-scale battles. Everything ran perfectly smoothly, and I suspect with the graphical fidelity of this game, well, the options would be welcome for somebody running something like a 5950, but for everybody else I don't think there will be any issues running the game at 60 FPS at 1080p fluently. Now there is some rebind options down here as well, which are welcome if you're that sort of individual. Me personally, I just, well, hammer square peg into a round hole as violently as possible to get the desired result. In this game, there is a slight issue which I will mention later on. It kind of fucks me over in that regard, but all in due time. Now, the options for playing the game proper are historical battles, custom battles, and campaign. The campaign is basically telling the story from either the Confederate or the Union side of the war. I don't know for sure if the Confederate side can actually win or if something happens, but as far as I've got in the campaign with the Confederates, which is about 12 hours at this point, and many battles won, things are still pretty dicey and pretty, well, I'm getting hammered into the damn ground, which is historically accurate from that point of view, because the South versus the North, the South had mostly plantations and slaves, the North had most of the industrial base and the army. I'll possibly update this first impression with the information if the campaign actually is winnable as a Confederate that is, if it goes outside of history. Though I suspect it won't. Now, talking about the custom battles are pretty simple. At the current time there's only this option, and yeah, select your side, select the difficulty, and either own or scenario. Let's say scenario. Pretty well depleted. With the scenario option you get pretty much historical tallies. With the own battle you get points, which probably allows you to be a bit more flexible within the historical context of the battle. The historical battles themselves, as far as I've seen, I'm going to check this right now to be sure. Yep, they are completely linked, as far as I can tell, to the battles you fight on the campaign. So these may look like few, but actually they are unlocked via playing the campaign and either winning or possibly getting your ass kicked in the campaign battle respective to that historical battle. I've done Antietam, I've done all of them in here, in the campaign. But there are many more battles to go from this point on. If I'm not mistaken, let me just see. I don't think... No. Let's just load up and be sure I'm not gonna eat shit live. Yeah, Antietam. The battle that's available in the historicals. After this one, there'll be a slew of smaller battles. I'll actually show you guys how that looks. Let's go to 14. No, let's 15. 15 should be before I start preparing for Antietam. This is a minor battle. The minor battles themselves impact major battles by giving you slight bonuses. Like for example, there were 3 battles here, there's only this one left, I've done the other 2, which decrease enemy army size. And a minus 15% might not sound like a lot to most people, but to be honest, I've actually fought battles where the enemy had around or maybe even in excess of 100,000 troops coming towards my fat furry bottom, and that is not a fun thing to discover when the game actually tells you, oh, actually in this battle, because the major battles are multi-phase and sometimes you actually have to go out, you have to actually win one phase, come out into the army camp section, do a bit of stuff there, and then you head into the next phase. And each phase has a different amount of enemy troops. And if you're not paying attention, like I didn't, well, at first I was like, oh, I have 40,000 troops, oh, versus 30,000 Unionists, let's kill the emancipationists, yeah! Next phase, it nearly quadrupled the enemy army size. Mostly because they got reinforcements and the troops I did not kill stayed in the battle. Which was not fun, let me tell you. But that said, let's just... Oh, actually we can do it in here. Back to the army camp. Now, these are standard troops in the beginning, depending on how you start your general. You get the option of either having 1 division or 2. Well, possibly 2 if you have any army organization. I have up to 6, so I have 3 divisions plus a lot of other stuff. Scroll over and you get an idea what you get for every level you invest. Now, speaking bluntly, army organization, at least up until Antietam, should be up to level 4-ish. Up until that level, you're pretty much fine. You're not gonna have any difficulties. I say this because more army organization, it helps. It's useful. But not as useful as getting, for example, politics or economy, which impact your ability to resupply quite significantly. politics affects how much money and how many troops you get. As you can see here, on normal difficulty I'm floating a lot of cash but not a lot of troops. And this is very important because, well, at the current time I have no option to trade reputation, which you get for every victory and sometimes for some draws, for extra troops. Those are reputation trades are not situational, are one-offs, and they not refresh, they add new ones in not that often. And I already used my option to trade reputation for extra troops, which was about 7,500 troops. That's it. So besides politics and economy, medicine is also quite very important. Training depends really. You could use training to get more ready access to veterans, which I think I should have done in this let's play, to be honest. Well, not let's play, playthrough, that's it. There won't be any let's plays of this game because, to be honest, I like it as a puzzle sort of challenge game, but for my own personal enjoyment. But in terms of let's plays, I kind of prefer games like RimWorld or Dwarf Fortress more. As I was saying, training to superior levels will allow you to get cheaper veterans and trade more for that. Veterans themselves are not, so to say, super soldiers, but they break less often, they have more efficiency and are better off, i.e. when they break in a critical moment or stuff like that, they don't suffer as many casualties because they don't break as often. I've had troops break willy-nilly at some points, really. And to be honest, when up until the moment the unit breaks, casualties are pretty manageable. I mean, the best line units I have, like for example Campers bunch, rarely suffer more than, let's say, 30% attrition rates in some of the nastier battles, be it minor or major. But the less off guys, like for example Hayes, if I'm not mistaken, this guy actually took about 50% casualties last battle because he got stuck in the bell end of a rather big rush of 2 enemy units, which were not only bigger than him but also had, how should I put this, the element of surprise. And the AI, being a bit more smart than I would have liked in a game like this, used the troops to quite good effect. Yeah, the AI actually is surprisingly good in this game, because those 2 units rushed towards Hayes in charge, which is normally a melee attack, and I was like, oh shit, shoot, retreat, which is basically just order your guys to shoot, then pull them back, revealing their rear. Yeah, it's kind of bad, but when you're getting charged, it doesn't matter so much, like in games, for example, like Medieval 2 Total War, if you get hit in the arse with a charge, in this particular game. But if you get shot in the arse, then your morale takes a hit, and the AI knows that. Boy, is it fucking amazing to see 2 enemy troops stop charging when you're starting to pull back and open fire. Dear God, is that impressive. And the AI also varies its tactics quite significantly, though take that with a bit of salt, because me as a player, well, I'm not that good of a strategist, but I'm good at tactics. So like in my playthrough of this game, I managed quite a lot of spectacular tactical victories capturing enemy troops. In fact, one time I even captured a 500 strong cavalry unit. But at strategic level, well, right at this point, let me put it to you like this. Load. Okay. At this point, you think, okay, you have 2 divisions, you're good. Go to Antietam, start the battle. Have some fun. Yes, yes, yes. You're ready, you can do this. 3 divisions. And that is my strategic acuity in one image, basically. I'm good at winning battles and even winning flanks in more macrocosm details, but macrocosm level. But yeah, the moment I have to think strategically and long term, I suffer quite a lot, especially when the AI is smarter than me at certain points. Though the couple of times the AI managed to surprise me with those charge and then volley fire tactics, after those 2 times or 3, I learned my lesson and I usually just stick in heavy cover. That way, even if they get charged proper, 2,000 troops versus 5,000 can still do a lot of casualties to the enemy before they break. Once troops break though, they take a horrendous amount of damage. For example, if, let's say, a standard line unit, i.e. infantry with rifles, breaks in front of a enemy line unit with cannons behind it, well, you can be very freaking sure if those cannons open up when your troops are completely bugging it out, you're probably going to lose about 200-300 of your soldiers if the unit is near maximum capacity. Now, besides that whole deal and the whole AI spiel, we're going to talk about unit types, which are pretty simple: infantry, artillery, cavalry, and skirmishers. Basically, line units, these guys are going to eat a lot of shit. Artillery are cannons, basically. They fire 3 variations of shot: solid shot cannonballs, which are for long distance, I believe HE shells for medium range, and grape shot for close range. You're starting on cannons like, for example, the 6 and I believe the 8 pounders. Let me just see. 6 and 10 pounders are not particularly good in long range. The 6 pounders are disastrous at medium range, but if you don't have anything, they're very good at short range buckshotting. And for nothing else, at least the 6 pounder field and to a degree the 6 pounder howitzer reload decently quickly. Though any day of the week you'd prefer 12 pounder Napoleons. Now, besides those two, we also have cavalry, which, for anybody who's curious how that would work in a post-Napoleonic era, it really does not. The cavalry is highly visible. If the enemy has vision in a field, they'll spot them much farther than they'll spot a line infantry unit. And they will shoot them quite effectively too, the moment they get into range, especially if they have artillery. For some reason, artillery in this game really loves shooting cavalry. And they are quite fragile to boot and low on numbers. But if you have a cavalry unit decently well positioned to exploit an enemy unit that's routing or close to routing, well, they can usually hack to pieces the enemy unit, or possibly either cause them to permanently rout, i.e. the enemy loses, well, the AI specifically, loses the unit permanently from the battle, or you can even capture them, which is very preferable because capturing enemy soldiers allows you to trade them for more of your troops. That doesn't really make sense when you think about it, but basically, as I imagine it in game logic terms, the politicians on the Confederate side, in my case, are happy you managed to capture soldiers, which they can trade for resources or stuff like that, basically ransom off back to the Union, and you get troops from the politicians because you did a good job. Ideally speaking, cavalry units to be effective, you'd also want them to be above 250 in strength. 500 will be pretty dangerous for even a 2k line infantry unit. Granted, they won't completely wreck their day if they're fresh, but if push comes to shove and you really have to hold the flank, it's an option. The skirmishers are, to a degree, basically special forces. Think line infantry with better weapons, to a degree better training, and more lethality. As far as I've seen, they come with either long-range sniping capabilities in terms of weapons, or short-range Daka, basically. And trust me when I say the Daka, while good, because let's just compare fire rate 27 versus, let's say, this thing, which has a fire rate of 133. They'll chew through their ammunition quite readily, which you'll have to very much husband and, whenever possible, put into logistics extra points, because you will run out of ammunition quite frequently if you do not. While they chew through their ammunition quite quickly, they also chew through the enemy quite quickly. The problem is, for example, some of the better rapid-fire guns, or compromise between rapid-fire and short-range, are usually right in the range of, which one was it exactly? The Springfield 1855, which is the AI's more favorite weapon, because otherwise how did explain I got this many and I still have a lot of troops fielding them. Yes, I captured a lot of enemies or captured a lot of their weapons. So yeah, the short range option is problematic. Me personally, I like using them as snipers, which is evident by their fit here, because, well, artillery can be quite an issue, but special forces in cover can do quite a bit of damage to artillery, maybe even cause them to rout a couple of times. Coupled with, say, cavalry that's been hidden quite well, because if not, the artillery would have focused on the cavalry first, then the special forces. Coupled with the cavalry, you could possibly either capture or permanently rout the cannon unit, depending on your luck. Ideally speaking, yeah, this would be a good thing to have, because then it'd actually be getting close to cannon range, if I'm not mistaken. Not exactly, but more times than not, the AI isn't firing at maximum range, or try to get their guns into medium range at about, let's say, 600 yards or thereabouts, because then they can actually use their cannons to greater effect. And the AI, by what I've seen at least, uses a lot of Napoleon 12 pounders, at least in the Confederate versus the Union type of stuff. The armory is basically where you check what you have on stock, versus what you can buy. You also get an idea here either of the weapons that you will someday get access to, or of the ones that the enemy has. This would be a good rifle, actually. Very good efficiency. Anyway, personally, if I get the option to use some of this, or anything with decent like 350 range, I'm golden. The fire rate not so important, because to be honest, in this game the fire rate is more important for non-line units like the special forces and the cavalry. The cavalry themselves, I would recommend, at least in this game in my opinion, using them with melee weapons. The melee weapons, i.e. let's say the lock pistol and the cavalry saber, the the ranged option goes down in ability, so to say, but to compensate for that fact, you get much better melee. and to be honest, if you put them with colts or something similar, you really will not notice. Sure, they could be good as skirmishers, but as I said before, they're quite fragile, and to be honest, you're better off rushing line infantry units than trying to engage them in fire exchanges, basically, because even in cover, cavalry gets a penalty to it. In terms of artillery, pretty standard stuff, already presented it. The barracks shows you your options in terms of recruiting or your currently available or wounded officers. Units that have officers are harder to break and stuff like that, basically. They're better off. And the moment the officer either is wounded, i.e. is à la balle, or killed, permanently out of the game, the unit does suffer morale problems quite a bit. They level up quite decently quickly, to be honest, but the game does not allow you to protect them to any fair degree. Line infantry officers tend to get wounded with an alarming amount of frequency, in my games at least. And to be honest, yeah. And in career terms, as I showed earlier, leveling up. The politics, economy are very useful, medicine quite useful. Training depends if you want to not have my problems with the whole recruit availability issue. Army organization, the more you have, the bigger your army, and the more divisions, the more units per your division, etc., etc. Logistics, more ammo, really good. Reconnaissance, to be honest, in my experience, even 3 is worthless. 2 at most, to get an idea how many cannons and how many soldiers they have. Otherwise, pump everything else. This should be at 4 up until Antietam, and then bullion. Now, enough talking, let's get to showing how the battle looks. Well, the battle screen, so to say. Let's pause, which is the P key, not the space key. The space key is basically halt or cancel order. Now, in the game proper, moving troops is basically selecting them usually via their symbol above and clicking. Holding the button allows you to point them, basically. Nothing new for anybody who's played, for example, any of the Total War games. The one thing I did notice quite late in the game, in terms of playthrough, is this feature. When you select more of them, you can draw a line, and as far as I can see, and in my experience, they're sorted by type. The line infantry first, cannons behind, cavalry and officers behind the artillery. This is your division commander. You are the first division's, well, your character per se is the first division's commander, and I don't think you'll ever be able to be killed. You're immortal, basically. In terms of tactical depth for the game proper, let's actually put these guys back so they don't muck up my diatribe. The tactical depth: if you're in woods, you take much less damage. If you're out in the field, you take a lot more damage. If you're in fortifications like these guys are, for example, with this, you get a lot more bonuses. But compared to forests, let's just go over. 100% speed, 50% cover, 100% damage, stealth. It has a melee modifier though, which is quite important. This, however, in woods, 500% stealth, 85% damage, so you deal less damage, but 160% cover. For 15% less damage, you take 60% less damage, which is quite an important thing to keep in mind. Now let's see if we can catch our cannons shooting off grape shot, because they are well within grape shot range. Come on. I'm guessing the cannons are a wee bit glitchy at the current time. This being not exactly... well, actually... oh, they do have supplies. Okay, come on, shoot. There we go. That is grape shot, and it is quite effective. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the units themselves are symbolically represented. This is by no means 500 troops in visual terms. As far as I can tell, at least, the troop representation is something like one visible soldier for every 10 in your unit, or thereabouts. I haven't actually taken time to properly count, but yeah. Besides that whole lovely bit, this is your resupply unit. You run it around your troops and they take supply out of them automatically. If you're thinking, wow, that sounds a wee bit like, for example, Sudden Strike. No, yeah, Sudden Strike, it would be perfectly correct. The division officer unit has an aura around them which boosts up your soldiers' stats in certain amounts. Depends on what traits the respective officer has. And it also helps stabilize routing units a bit faster. Otherwise they generally can run quite a fair bit before being like, maybe running isn't such a good idea. Why? Well, we are getting shot in the arse. True. Besides that, what else can be said about the game? Due to the more advanced AI and, well, more advanced, you need to actually have comparative, technically more advanced than, for example, Total War's battle AI, which is several chromosomes short of a prefrontal cortex. The game is challenging to say the least, even at normal difficulty. Like, for example, look at this. If I did not have the fortifications to rely on, I would be in serious shit. Because as you guys can see, the AI is not in any way stupid. It puts its troops in cover as much as possible. It relies on subterfuge. Whoa, wrong unit. Keep doing that. And it is by no means gentle with you. It will bully you as often and as violently as possible. And for that reason, I am keeping this game as a fun, relaxing element to my repertoire. Because to be honest, I did plan on playing the game only about 8 hours, because in itself there isn't much in the way of depth, but how the depth is used, though I'm not particularly sure, for example, how Gettysburg was in comparison, but speaking strictly for this game, the depth that is existent and the way it is presenting its problems, tactical and strategic, it's a game that basically challenges you to do better. Because, for example, once you learn that certain types of fortifications give you an immense amount of melee resilience, like, just look at that, including the route increase in terms of casualties suffered. I mean, they had about 2,000, now they're 200 soldiers shorter. The game just is enjoyable, even if it's not Dawn of War 2 in terms of tactical depth or Total War in terms of strategic depth. Yeah, it's kinda limited, but what it does have, it's quite enjoyable, and at the current price in early access, which is about 28 euros, I'm not sure how much in US dollars, but I hope it's more, because we need to be fair, not get or forced to be paid to pay more as Europeans than the Americans do, because yeah, euro more than dollar. Here you see what happens to cavalry, especially when even a 500 strong cavalry line infantry unit shoots it in the rear, or was it in the rear or was it in the flank? Whichever, it had a bonus. Things did not end well for cavalry. But they did manage to rout those guys, which is useful. And we ran out of supply. Another reason to get logistics. And speaking of strategics, because I just remembered, the one problem with this game, and it's a problem I hope they fixed before the early access finishes and the game launches proper, is the one major flaw that fucked me over in my current playthrough. You have 1,864 troops. Reinforced to 200. Okay. Soldiers, well, recruits from here get put here. Okay. As you saw earlier, Antietam requires 3 divisions. If you have 0 troops, or even if you just have too few to make a cohesive and useful 3rd division like I have, because with 5,270 I can only make 2 line infantry units and maybe a 6-pounder battery. Well, if you want to downsize your current units, let's say reduce camper to 500. No. What in the bloody hell? Oh, come on. This is the one major flaw I found in the game. Everything else, graphics options, the lack of true 720p, though that's a really, really petty nitpick, pardon. Everything else is tolerable. It's okay. It's perfectly understandable. The game itself is enjoyable. It's fun, but please give us the option to redistribute soldiers, or even if you're not having soldier issues like I am currently, maybe you want to equalize the number of artillery pieces in each division. Well, if you have already selected, already put, let's for example say the maximum amount of Napoleons that are available in the market and in your armory. Okay, now you want to take 11 from here and let's say give them to Daniel Hill's bunch. Well, you can't anymore because you can't downsize. You would love to, but you can't. And that flaw, if it gets fixed before launch, and I'm not aware at the current time of them actually working to fix that small gameplay flaw. If it gets fixed, the game will be well worth the 28 euros access fee for people who like strategy games. For those who are new to the whole RTT strategy wargame type thing, if you play on easy, or let's even say normal if you're feeling particularly masochistic like I usually am, it'll be worth it. Quite worth it actually. Thank you for watching, and until next time, buff the